In the dusty stretch of the frontier, where the wind carried whispers of danger, and every shadow could hide a threat, a woman named Clara rode alone, her heart steady but her eyes alert, for she knew the land was unforgiving to those who traveled without caution. Yet fate is cruel, and that morning as the sun burned across the desert sky, 3 figures on horseback emerged from behind the rocks, bandits with hard eyes and hands that never hesitated on their triggers, cutting off her path and circling her like wolves scenting blood. Their laughter, sharp and mean as one, raised his rifle and said she wasn't going anywhere until she gave them everything she carried, and more if they pleased. Clara's hand trembled near her saddlebag, but she knew resistance might be her death. The bandits stepped closer, one cocking his revolver and pressing it toward her chest, the barrel cold as ice against her skin. Her breath quickened, her mind raced for escape, but the world seemed to narrow into fear, and in that heartbeat when hope seemed lost, the thunder of a gunshot cracked through the canyon, not from the bandits but from a lone rider cresting the ridge, a cowboy clad in dust-stained leather, his hat pulled low, his revolver smoking in his hand, his voice firm as the desert wind as he shouted that no man would lay a finger on her. The bandits spun in rage, bullets flying, but the cowboy's aim was true, his horse charging down the slope like a storm unleashed. Each shot he fired echoed like justice itself, striking fear into the outlaws who realized too late they had cornered prey that was no longer alone. Clara ducked low, heart pounding as the cowboy's presence shattered the bandits' confidence. One tried to pull her from her horse, but the cowboy's bullet found his shoulder and sent him sprawling into the dust. Another raised his rifle toward the cowboy, but before the trigger could pull, the cowboy's shot rang out faster, and the man's weapon fell useless from his grasp. The leader cursed and spat, demanding his men stand their ground. But already their courage was breaking, for the rider who came to Clara's aid was no ordinary drifter. He was known in whispers along the trail as a man who carried both a steady hand and a fearless heart. The cowboy wheeled his horse closer, his presence towering, his revolver unwavering as he told the leader that if he wanted to test fate, he'd best draw now and be ready to lose. The desert fell silent, dust swirling between them, until the bandit's nerve collapsed, and with a desperate curse, he kicked his horse into retreat, his men scrambling after, vanishing into the barren horizon, leaving Clara trembling yet unhurt. The cowboy rode to her side, his eyes softening as he asked if she was harmed. She shook her head, though her hands still shook, her lips whispering thanks, her voice breaking under the weight of relief. He tipped his hat, saying he couldn't ride past a woman in danger and do nothing, then extended his hand, strong and steady, telling her she'd ride with him now, where the road was safer. And for the first time since terror had struck, Clara felt the weight lift from her chest as she grasped his hand and let him pull her close upon his saddle, the wind sweeping through her hair as his horse thundered away, leaving behind the dust of danger and carrying her toward freedom, the desert sky opening wide above them like a promise of hope, her heart racing not with fear but with gratitude and something unspoken that stirred deep when she looked at the stranger who had risked his life for hers. The cowboy's gaze stayed forward, watchful as ever, yet his presence was a shield she knew would not falter. They rode into the horizon together, bound not by chance but by courage, the kind of story told around campfires long after the night falls silent. And as their figures grew smaller against the setting sun, one truth echoed louder than the gunfire that had saved her. Heroes still lived in the wild, and sometimes they rode in just when the world was darkest. So if this story stirred your heart and kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because more tales of courage, love, and the wild frontier are waiting, and your support keeps these stories alive, bringing the fire of the Old West back to life with every tale told. The desert stretched endlessly as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with fire and gold while Clara clung to the cowboy's arm, her pulse still racing from the ambush they had left behind, the memory of gun barrels pointed at her chest still burning in her mind, yet the steady rhythm of his horse beneath them and the protective weight of his presence began to settle the storm within her. She dared to glance up at the man who had saved her, his jaw sharp, his eyes scanning the horizon with unwavering vigilance, and though words stuck in her throat, she managed to whisper her gratitude once more, but he only tipped his hat, saying no thanks were needed where justice was concerned. Still, she felt the need to know who he was. What kind of stranger risked his life against armed bandits for a woman he'd never met? And as the silence stretched, the cowboy finally spoke, his voice low as thunder rolling across distant canyons. telling her his name was Colt McGraw, a drifter by most reckonings, but a man with a past tied to blood and law. Clara listened, the sway of the ride carrying his story. How years ago his own kin had been cornered just like she had, robbed of freedom and life by ruthless outlaws. And he had sworn then never again to turn his back when cruelty raised its head. His words struck deep in Clara's heart, for she too had lost, her father slain, on the trail by thieves not unlike those who threatened her today, her mother gone soon after from sorrow, leaving Clara with only her will and a small homestead to protect. Tears welled in her eyes as she confessed her story, and Colt's silence carried weight, his hand tightening briefly on the reins as if to promise her that she was not alone in her pain. Night soon fell and the desert stars lit their path. Yet danger lingered, for bandits seldom accepted defeat so easily, and sure enough, far behind them shadows moved, tracking them through the darkness. Colt noticed before Clara did, his senses sharpened by years of survival, and he urged his horse into the shelter of a canyon where the moonlight could not betray their figures. There they made camp, a small fire glowing between them, sparks dancing upward as the silence gave way to something gentler. Clara, still shaken but steadier now, asked him why he had chosen to intervene. For surely it was easier to ride past and avoid trouble. Colt looked into the flames, his voice carrying the weight of conviction, saying that a man who rides past injustice without lifting a hand is no man at all. And though he had lived alone on the trail, carrying only his horse and revolver for company, moments like this proved that sometimes fate rides harder than choice. Clara found herself studying him, the strength in his shoulders, the quiet sorrow in his eyes, and against the fear that had nearly broken her, something new stirred, a fragile trust, a budding admiration, perhaps even the earliest spark of something her heart had not dared to feel in years. But before she could dwell on it, the sound of shifting rocks echoed above the canyon walls. Colt rose instantly, revolver drawn, motioning her to stay low. The bandits had returned more than before, a dozen silhouettes creeping in the shadows, their leader's voice cutting through the night with venom, swearing they'd make Clara pay for their humiliation, and that the cowboy's grave would be dug before dawn. The firelight flickered across Colt's determined face as he whispered for Clara to stay behind the rocks, no matter what she heard, and then he stepped forward, the embodiment of defiance, revolver gleaming beneath the stars, his voice ringing out as he told them they'd made their choice when they raised a gun against a woman, and tonight they'd face the cost. The clash that followed was like lightning in the dark, bullets sparking against stone, gunfire echoing like thunder rolling through the canyon. Colt moved with precision born of countless battles, his every shot deliberate, bandits dropping one by one as chaos spread among them. Clara, though terrified, could not stay hidden. She peeked from the rocks and saw him, unwavering and fierce, protecting her with a resolve that made her chest tighten with something beyond fear. But the bandits pressed hard, circling from every side, and Clara's courage surged. She grabbed a fallen rifle left by one outlaw, and though her hands shook, she raised it and fired at the man who tried to flank Colt. The shot ringing true and buying the cowboy a precious second, he turned, saw her, his eyes flashing with something between surprise and pride, and together they fought, the unlikely pair standing their ground until the canyon floor was littered with wounded outlaws, the survivors fleeing into the night with curses of vengeance. Silence fell heavy, smoke and dust lingering. Clara's chest heaved with exhaustion, the rifle slipping from her trembling hands. But Colt strode to her, steady as ever, and caught her before she fell, telling her she had the spirit of fire in her veins, stronger than she knew, and for the first time she allowed herself to lean into him, not just as savior but as partner in survival. The night deepened, and though danger was not gone, their bond had been forged in the crucible of fire and gunpowder, a bond neither of them could ignore. And as dawn broke over the canyon, Colt saddled his horse once more, lifting Clara into the saddle with him, telling her the road ahead would be hard, that enemies still hunted, but together they could carve a new fate. She nodded, no longer just a woman rescued, but a woman reborn through the storm, and as their silhouettes rode into the sunrise, Clara knew that destiny had shifted forever, and her life had been tied to a man who lived by the gun but carried the heart of a protector, the cowboy who would not let her fall. So if this chapter of their journey stirred your heart and kept you riding along in suspense, remember to subscribe to the channel, because more tales of courage, danger, and unbreakable bonds await. And every story brings the untamed West alive again, One shot, one promise, one heartbeat at a time.